windows keep the cold outside, while the hypocrites hide inside, with the lies of statues in their minds, where the Christian religion made them blind, where they hide and pray to the God of a bitch spelt backwards is dog, not for one race, one creed, one world, but for money, effective, absurd. Do you pray to the Holy Ghost when you suck your host? Do you read who's dead in the Irish Post? Do you give away the cash you can't afford on bended knees and pray to the Lord? Fat pig priest, sanctimonious smiles. He takes the money, you take the lies. This is religion and Jesus Christ. This is religion cheaply priced. This is Bibles full of libel. This is sin in eternal hymn. This is what they done. This is your religion. The apostles were 11. Now there's a sod in heaven. This is religion. There's a liar on the altar. The sermon never falter. This is religion. Your religion.
Happy Easter week. And this show is dedicated to Will Smith, and I'd like to congratulate him on his 10-year ban from the Oscars, from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Should be noted that we are talking about the same sanctimonious organization who honored Harvey Weinstein and Roman Polanski for so many years. Congratulations.
Build them up, knock them down. Build them up, knock them down. Build them up, knock them down. Build them up, knock them down.
Trying to please all these people around me is trying to reach for the moon. I see their faces looking so empty, saying, I hope that they'll finish soon. Could be a chat show. Could be a go-go. Reaction would be the same. So here I go, though why I don't know, trying to prove myself again. This reminds me of an experience that I went through recently. Well, where it felt that it didn't even matter, whatever I did, that I wasn't getting through to people. That I know it wasn't that long ago, although it seems like an eternity and perhaps otherworldly at this point. But prior to the pandemic, I felt that I could awaken the most jaded hermit. I mean, that person who would say, no, 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 no. That I would be able to get them to say, yes, 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 yes. But I see that we have created an atmosphere where people walk aimlessly through their existence in their own personal cocoons. And if those tendencies weren't already in existence prior to the pandemic, COVID put it on steroids. And personally, I do not know what it will take to wake the people from their deep sleep. Welcome to Radio Tipping Point. Our show today is titled, Love Me, Love Me, Love Me, I'm a Zombie. And due to the polarization that we have been going through for a number of years now, we seem to have two categories of individuals within our society. The first group is the one that I'm calling the zombies, who are the ultra docile, which means it doesn't matter what is thrown in their direction, you cannot get a reaction. And then there is the other group, which is pretty much 180 degrees. That group that is identity fused and super aggressive. And due to our fixation, our obsession, our dependence on this concept of duality, we feel that we can either belong to the one group or the other. Of course, this does not befit reality. But then reality is all in the mind. What you deem reality to be is what it is. Entertain me. I'm as blank as can be, and I've seen it before, and I've heard it before, and I think that I like it. But no, I don't like it. It just goes on over and over and over and over and over again. Freedom is not given to us by anyone. We have to cultivate it ourselves. It is a daily practice. No one can prevent you from being aware of each step you take, or each breath in and each breath out. That was a piece of wisdom from Thich Nhat Hanh, which I think is very appropriate when we look at that duality, either being ultra docile or being identity aggressive driven. And I find myself moving between those two categories. And in fact, it could even be in a split second of moving from one to the other. And very often, I cannot even explain why. Well, I can, I guess, to a certain degree. The acquiescence, or that zombie-like attitude, is very much tied to a certain resignation that we go through, thinking that there is nothing we can do to change the situation, and the only safety, the only security that we have is tied to the cocoon that we create that acts as a shield to protect us from all of those things that we can't control, will only do us harm. and very often we feel is the cause of our malaise, although that situation is one that we create ourselves. And looking at the quote from Thich Nhat Hanh, looking at the presence and the ability for us to manage the here and now allows me to think often, being fully aware, but being equally as helpless. Within the show, I'd like to first start with a bit of a history about zombiedom, and give you some examples of that docile attitude that I referred to in the beginning of the show. Some situations that I've run across. Perhaps, just perhaps, maybe even some tips of how we can avoid the zombie state. And the rest will be up to happenstance. The concept of the zombie comes from West Africa, and it was very much tied to slavery under the French colonization. And this was taking place primarily in a country that eventually was called Haiti, is currently called Haiti. And the idea of being a zombie, certainly in the context that I am trying to depict here in the show, is referring to somebody who goes through life without thinking or feeling, because that numbness is that shield that is used to protect ourselves from perhaps some emotions that we might have that we might not necessarily be so happy about. For good, bad, and indifferent, I've been thinking about the situation with Will Smith and the necessity of so many individuals to make such a brouhaha out of what was considered to be a reaction that it would be a lie if any of us were to claim that we wouldn't understand those emotions. Now, this has nothing to do with justification, and we, as human beings, need to be able to separate the right and wrongness of whatever the actions are, either coming from somebody else or, even more importantly, those that are generated by our actions. And the idea, something that's talked about quite often in the show, whether it was situational, based upon the situation, or dispositional. Here I would argue that a number of us would probably fall within the same behavioral range as what was to be found from Will Smith. And you saw his regret of his actions. He was aware after the fact. I tend to think that his actions were not premeditated. They were very spontaneous. But even more revealing has been the reaction coming from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, where they feel very comfortable in painting Will Smith as that bad apple. The bad apple, which does not represent anybody else within the Academy, as if nobody else within the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences would ever react the same way. The ability of forgiveness, allowing the possibility for self-forgiveness, the ability of establishing closure, and to eliminate the necessity of making everything so sensational. So if you ask me, Will Smith has become pretty lucky, because now he's been spared of the hypocrisy which is to be found within the organization. And in turn, the titillation that we seem to be clamoring because this distraction, and it's truly a distraction, stops us from thinking about those things that are much more important. I've thought about this one quite a bit, the idea of recognizing emotions, relishing in our emotions, knowing full well that often it does not make life any easier. But by negating that emotional part of us as individuals, we negate our humanity. And we have plenty of examples. Doesn't take much to observe those tendencies that are to be found within our day-to-day routine, either at the workplace, where zombiedom is the preferred alternative due to a situation where the conditions would be a mega burden. Some of us have this within our relationships, where a certain level of zombiedom has entered the realm. Being a defense mechanism for that, perhaps a situation that would not be tenable. And da capo would be our social life, where we go through routines, which for me are no different than being a zombie, not thinking, not feeling. Because from an anthropological perspective, that is the representation of ourselves within that social strata that we find ourselves to be. And the question is whether we detect any type of life in these types of examples. I certainly don't. Anytime you're put into a situation and you receive no response, I often pose the question to myself, so are these people actually breathing? I watch people on the street that are glued to that piece of technology that they hold in their hands, where if you've noticed that people seem like they're almost drunk, going from one end of the sidewalk to the other, because they're so engrossed with that of what they were doing with this piece of technology, that truly the people are mesmerized. And in other situations, I would consider them to be sleepwalking, but we know that these people are not asleep. But one thing's for sure, things are taking place around them and they're totally devoid of the here and now. And the ability to relish in the present. And from a personal perspective, I have the feeling very often that it doesn't even matter what I do. There is no reaction. And then I think, well, that was a complete waste of time. I try to give them all of my best, and it's taking a turn for the worst. Things go wrong, start to quote the wrong verse. I think that I might be cursed. This is where my nerves become battered. It's falling apart. Why did I ever start? And I wonder why I thought this mattered. Other people's actions are the result of their own pain and not the result of any intention to hurt you. Another quote from Thich Nhat Hanh. And over this last week, I've been thinking of various people that I've met within the last 40 years, I'd say, maybe even going farther back. Of trying to understand this nothingness, because as mentioned, this is not a new phenomena. This is something that has been pervasive through time. And the point I'm trying to raise is that we have taken this to the extremes. And to a certain degree, this is a call for all of us to be cognizant, to be able to see this condition. And if all of us were able to do something in our own way to manage this proliferation of zombiedom, then I think that we do have the power to do something about it. There was a girlfriend I had a number of years ago who I think was suffering under fear of failure. She looked at herself as being an intellectual, and in fact, I think that was appropriate. But in retrospect, I thought that was actually quite amazing for an 18-year-old to lament, like Kowalski in Streetcar Named Desire, I could have been a contender. And I'm thinking, my God, for someone to have such sort of laments of a situation that was totally self-inflicted. Basically, she started studying at university, and for some reason she could not match her own expectations, or perhaps these were expectations that were implanted on her. I just suspect the latter. And so the option for her was to get off the merry-go-round. But her getting off the merry-go-round was actually lip service, because this lament and this lack of doing anything was for me that ticket for the merry-go-round. And in fact, I remember in previous life I was also in radio, and I was doing a show, and we had this girlfriend came to join me in the studio, and I had already handed in my weekly slot, and I was jumping in as a guest. And the program director was to be found within the studio and started talking to my girlfriend. And he asked her the question, so what do you do? And she really struggled with that question, because the fact was that fear of failure put her in a paralyzed state where she really wasn't doing anything. And I don't remember exactly all the wording, but I do remember what the program director said to her, that it's important to be doing something. It doesn't matter what it is, but it's important to be doing something. Now, I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I think that we are always doing something. The question is whether we are cognizant of what we're doing. Let's be honest. We're breathing. Our bodies are functioning. Our minds are moving probably way too fast. And yours truly is clearly not an exception to that one. So isn't it enough to recognize that? To think in terms of either pessimism or optimism oversimplifies the truth. The problem is to see reality as it is. As it is. As it is. As it is.
Build them up, knock them down. Build them up, knock them down. Build them up, knock them down. Build them up, knock them down.
I see a movement down in the front row. Maybe it's just a mistake. She's smiling at me, but he's frowning at me. Which conclusion do I make? Fold all your arms and look straight ahead at this puppet on a string. You're feeling confused, but you've made a decision. You don't like anything. Now, I tend to think that the answer to this question should be self-explanatory, but you know what we say about assumptions. So the zombie state, is this situational or dispositional? Just like everything, it's a combination of both. And it's all tied to the ability to foster some sort of resilience. Resilience being the ability to bounce back after a situation where the alternative is to sink faster and faster into the abyss. So in my mind, being resilient means that you are able to recognize yourself within that situation, that you are not happy about your actions or your state. Your state is probably a better phrase for that. And you decide to do something about it. And you know it's not just like walking into a room, turning on the light switch, and all of a sudden having enlightenment. That it's a process that we need to follow, that is not always easy. In fact, I would argue that it's often not easy. But we understand that it is preferable to the alternative. And the alternative would be staying in that state, in that funk, in that zombiedom, and understanding that we do have a choice. Which reminds me of a talk that I gave last week that was completely spontaneous. And if I may say so, I actually kind of surprised myself. Probably in the necessity that I had to say what I said. But I described this funk, this zombiedom that we all find ourselves to be in some fashion due to circumstances that we have been going through, most pronouncedly over the last 2 years. And what I said to this group was that You should not hold yourself responsible for this situation, and you should be able to forgive yourself of often the reaction that you have in trying to deal with it. Because it almost seems to be a knee-jerk reaction that we believe we control everything that takes place within our realm, in this obsession with control has raised its ugly head in a number of ways, certainly over the last couple of years. So I said to this group, do not hold yourself responsible. Recognize the situation. Be able to forgive yourself for a reaction that you weren't very happy about. But, remember, at the same time, we do have a choice. We might not necessarily always like the choice, but we have one. So through this activity of reflection, that we are able to remove ourselves. Now, remove ourselves is incorrect. Let's mark that one for editing. Oh, we're live. I can't do that. The ability to look at the here and now from a different perspective is really what we're talking about. Understanding what's taking place, understanding our own actions, performing some sort of evaluation of those actions, and then raising the question, is that what I want? Because the fact is, if it's not what you want, then it remains within your power to do something about it. So that was the point that I raised. That regardless of the situation, regardless of how dire that situation may be, we have the power to do something about it. And the last point that I raised within that talk that within that freedom of choice, if indeed we find ourselves to be in a situation that we don't want to be in, we have the ability to say no. That very often the obligations that we perceive are self-inflicted. In fact, nobody's really asking us to do this. We've made a decision, and in fact it falls within the realm of a sunk cost fallacy, meaning that, well, we've invested so much time so far that we cannot stop now. And I think to myself, who cares? This is something that we develop on our own. If we just stopped, most people probably wouldn't even notice. In fact, I suspect they will only notice after more or less the tail end of your transformation. Once you've decided not to ride the merry-go-round, you decide that the ticket has no value, you decide it's time to get off. Only once the merry-go-round becomes a distant memory, only at that point in time do I believe that those people around you, will they really pick up that you're no longer riding the merry-go-round? And they might even be somewhat indignant and saying, how come you don't ride the merry-go-round? Under the adage, well, if I'm miserable, then you should be too. As if any of these metrics bring any type of value. But it raises a situation where others are envious because you were able to make a cognitive decision in getting off the grid. So what is it? What is this zombiedom? Is it situational or dispositional? It's probably the Yankee Doodle in me, but I tend to think that if we are aware of the situation, if we are aware of our condition, if we are aware of our reaction, and if we are aware of our state, whether we are content with that of what's taking place or perhaps not, that we have the ability for those things that are dispositional, of recognizing them, understanding the constraints that we have due to our makeup, accepting it as such, but not accepting the condition, making a clear differentiation between the state, the condition we are in, and the way that we are, and the freedom of choice. The seed of suffering in you may be strong, but don't wait until you have no more suffering before allowing yourself to be happy. Another quote from Thich Nhat Hanh. And this is indeed something that lies within our control. So I mentioned somewhat in the beginning of the show that I would perform some sort of feeble attempt of putting together a 5-minute strategy on the cure for zombiedom. So here we go. The first step would be agency, or the feeling of control over actions and their consequences. For us to reach agency means that we need to go through those 4 steps that I mentioned. Understanding the outside situations, understanding the condition that it creates, understanding our reaction, and then lastly, understanding what our real feelings are, whether there's a sense of contentment or we perhaps may be in a restless state, or you might be flat out unhappy. That's possible too. So within this concept of establishing agency, then the control is clearly tied to our own personal state. It was very interesting. I met somebody yesterday from Mauritius who's been living here in Vienna for 10 years, a really interesting character. And he talked about a lot of things. This guy liked to talk. My wife said he likes to talk more than you do. And that's saying something. But he mentioned that we have the ability within ourselves to be happy or sad. And in fact, for me, there's a clear correlation between zombiedom and the sadness, following the adage, if you're sad, at least you have some way of recognizing that your existence, and at least you have some sort of emotions, which is really a very sad state of affairs, but unfortunately befits a number of people that we have within our society. And we're talking about situations that are often self-inflicted, under the adage, it's better to feel some sort of pain because otherwise you would be comfortably numb. So we do have agency, or we should strive towards agency. And that actual control is tied to presence. In other words, can we do something about the here and now? We can't do anything about yesterday. Yesterday's gone. But if we continue to take on those thoughts from yesterday and have them muddle up the waters of today's presence, then we should not be surprised if we cannot get out of this funk. And please, when I mention these ideas, there's one thing I need to make very clear, that this is a struggle for me as well. Because it's not always easy to turn it off and hit the snooze button, or even better, hit the game over button when the day's over. But it doesn't mean, just because it's difficult, that we shouldn't try. And this is very often tied to some decisions that we make, where it goes back to the sunk cost fallacy I was talking about earlier, where we say that, well, we've made the decision, so we have to follow through. And here I raise the question, let's go this route, is that decision still relevant? Because very possibly the value you saw at the time you made that decision is no longer to be found. So that means the justification for making that decision is no longer relevant. So then you have to go ahead and take a step back and say, well, if there's no value, if I get no value out of this, then why in God's name do I continue to move forward with this idea? And take a book from Nancy Reagan and just say no. You can't reverse the decision, and very often you have some residual price to pay due to that decision. But that being said, it does not mean that you do not have the ability to perform an about face, or at least a pivot. And in my mind, it is the first step that we take, not only in taking control, but stop blaming things from the past that influence the presence. Because the choice of influencing the presence lies strictly with us as individuals. And as I mentioned earlier, that very possibly, and most probably, people won't even give a hoot. They won't notice that all of a sudden you changed your mind, because the actual transformation takes place in a number of small steps. that are often not even close to being linear, and in fact, shouldn't be surprised that these decisions that you make and the actions that are corresponding to your decision, that they might even set you back. But then you must have the foresight to understand of what your end goal is. What's the outcome you're looking for? And understand that we're not talking about a clear path that's always linear. And in fact, there might be the unseen consequences that you could not foresee. But just like we have to let go of the past, that we should not be ruled by the future, of those things that we try to control, although in essence we can't. We can't control them. Acceptance is a very powerful tool that, here I have to be honest, is something I've only started to realize relatively recent. And for those that have fallen within zombiedom, that this change of state might end up even becoming a mega bolt to your own system. And I can think of times where I've been in what I consider to be a zombie state, clearly out of necessity, due to a situation that was very much tied to a mindset of what you were supposed to do in your life, in those conditions that befall us due to that mindset that we have within our society, and of course the corresponding reactions from my end. That once I was able to move all that to the side, or at least try to move those things to the side, that I noticed a sensitivity, a sense of emotions, a sense of exhilaration that I had not experienced in a long time. And so I almost had to buckle myself up, because these emotions become an out-of-body experience. And it reminds me of our reaction when we are surprised the way we are behaving. Kind of reminds me of this. Like Beavis and Butthead, that nervous laugh that is very indicative of what we do when we surprise ourselves. For things to reveal themselves to us, we need to be ready to abandon our views about them. Another quote from Thich Nhat Hanh. And then abandoning is all tied to the choice that I was referring to. Hello? Is there anybody in there? Just nod if you can hear me. Is there anyone home? Come on now, I hear you're feeling down. Well, I can ease your pain, get you on your feet again. Relax. I need some information first, just the basic facts. Can you show me where it hurts? There is no pain. You are receding. A distant ship, smoke on the horizon. You are only coming through in waves. Your lips move, but I can't hear what you're saying. When I was a child, I had a fever. My hands felt like 2 balloons. Now I've got that feeling over again. I can't explain. You would not understand. This is not how I am. I have become And we have reached the end of another rendition of Radio Tipping Point. Again, thank you for indulging, or allowing me to indulge, better said, in the last 57 minutes. And if there was one wish I could pass on to you, if you find yourself in that zombie state, just say no.